that'll kind of like a little bit of a joke. But progressive overload is one of those laws. Another one of those laws is your exercises themselves do not determine adaptations. So here's what I mean. If you're like, I want to get stronger, you can't select an exercise. That doesn't determine you getting strong. If you don't do the exercise correctly, and I'm not even referring to the technique, that of course matters. But if you don't execute it in the right fashion, then you're not going to get that adaptation. So if you choose, I want to get stronger, I'm going to do a bench press. Well, if you do the wrong set range, the wrong repetition range, the wrong speed, you won't get strength. You maybe get muscular endurance and very little strength adaptation. So the exercise selection itself is important, but it does not determine the outcome adaptation. So the very first thing that you need to think about if you're like, I want to get stronger or add muscle, is not the exercise choice, right? It is the application of the exercise. What are the sets? What are the reps? What are the rest ranges that you're using? That's going to be your primary determinant. Now, some exercises are certainly better for some adaptations. For example, a deadlift is probably not a great exercise to do for long duration endurance. Like you could theoretically do 30 straight minutes of deadlifting, but it's probably not our best choice, right? It's probably a pretty good choice for strength development, right? Because you're going to do a low repetition, high set range. You could theoretically do bicep curls for power, but probably not your best choice, right? Single joint isolation movement is not the best for developing power. You've ever done a bicep curl as fast as you possibly can? Like that's not going to go well. So in theory, any exercise can produce any adaptation given the execution is performed properly. So now that we've understood that a little bit, the exercise itself does not determine the adaptation. Coming within each one of these categories, exercise choice is an important variable because it does lend you to things like what movement pattern you're in. So in other words, if you want to get stronger and you're thinking, okay, what exercise do I do? You need to think a little bit about
halfway there.
What muscle groups do I want to use? And that's going to be leading you towards the exercise choice. For example, I want to use my quads more. Okay, fine. Maybe you're going to choose more of a front squat type of variation, a goblet squat. So the load is in front of you. If you want to emphasize maybe more of your hamstrings and glutes, you're going to maybe put a barbell on your back or do a different one. So the exercise choice is important to the prescription because it's going to determine a lot of your success. Okay, another kind of simpler way to think about this. If you're a beginner or moderate to intermediate, or maybe you don't have a coach, you probably want to hedge towards an exercise selection that is a little bit easier technically. So you maybe don't want to do a barbell back squat. It's actually a pretty complicated movement. Maybe you want to do a little bit more of, again, a goblet squat, or even use some machines or a split squat, something that's a little bit simpler because you don't have a coach, you're not a professional athlete. The likelihood of success is higher and the risk has now gone lower. So the very first variable within all of these is the exercise choice. The second one is the intensity, and that refers to, in this context, not perceived effort, like, wow, that was a really intense workout. It is quite literally either a percentage of your 1 rep at max or a percentage of your maximum heart rate or VO2 max. So for the strength-based things, you want to think about what's the percentage of the maximum weight I could lift one time, and that's what we're going to call 1 rep max. Or it's a percentage of my heart rate, right? So if I tell you to get on a bike and I want you to do intervals and I want you at 75%, I'm typically referring to 75% of your max heart rate or VO2 max or something like that. If I tell you to do squats at 75%, that means 75% of the maximum amount of weight you could lift one time or close.
In terms of determining 1 rep max, I confess I've never actually taken the 1 rep max for any exercise, but I have some internal sense of what that might be or what range it might be. Is it necessary for people to assess their 1 repetition maximum before going into
halfway there
these sorts of programs?
No, not at all. I think a more intuitive way is to take a repetition range. Well, you can do this a couple different ways. So there are equations you can run, and you can just Google these anywhere, and these are called conversion charts. And so it says, okay, if I did 75 pounds on my bench press and I did it 8 times, you can just run an estimate that say, okay, you're probably going to be able to bench about 95 pounds for 1 rep max or something. So that's a very easy conversion chart. So just pick a load that you feel comfortable with, but it's kind of heavy, but not like crazy heavy, and do as many repetitions as you can with a really good technique, and then look what that number would be. So conversion
probably safer than doing one repetition maximum.
For the general public who has, again, no coaching, it's safer. For a professional athlete, it's not even
10
safer,
seconds.
But or not even a professional athlete, but a trained person with a coach. But for most people, yeah, that's a good way to go about it. You can also just kind of do it with feel, in the sense that say you want to do a set of 5 repetitions, and you do the load, and you think, I could have done 1 or 2 more. And then you kind of have an idea of what that number is going to be. If you think, man, that last one, I had to kind of really, really, really get after it, then maybe just call that number, right? So you don't have to get overly concerned. In fact, when we start getting into these number ranges, you're going to see that they're all ranges. We're not going to give a specific 95% for one of these exact reasons. It's not that precise for most of them. In fact, some of them, like hypertrophy, have enormous ranges that you like almost can't miss. So the intensity in that case doesn't even matter for the most part, because that's not the primary determinant. Some of these you're going to see intensity is the determinant, and some of these you're going to see volume is the true determinant. So intensity, though, is the second one. Choice was the very first one, manipulatable variable. Intensity was the second one. The third one is what we call volume. And so this is just how many reps and how many sets are you doing, right? So if you're going to do 3 sets of 10, that volume would be 30, right? 5 sets of 5, that volume is 25. It's just a simple equation. How much work are you totally doing? The next one past that is called rest intervals. So this is the amount of time you're taking in between typically a set. Then from there you have progression, which is what we started to talk about, this progressive overload. Are you increasing by weight or reps or rest intervals or complexity or whatever? So all of those things can be changed as a method of progression. And so maybe you want to go progressing from a single joint exercise like a leg extension on a machine, and you want to progress by moving to a whole body movement like a squat. That in of itself, you don't have to change the load or the reps or the rest. That is a representation of progressive overload. And it's probably a pretty good place to start because number one, especially for beginners, you want to make sure that the movement pattern is correct. Don't worry about intensity. Don't worry about rep ranges or any of these things. You need to learn to move correctly, and you need to give your body some time to develop some tissue tolerance so that you're not getting overtly sore. In general, soreness is a terrible proxy for exercise quality. It's a really bad way to estimate whether it was a good or a bad workout, especially for people in that beginner to middle to moderate. In fact, even that for our professional athletes, we do not use soreness as a metric of a good workout. It's a really bad idea for a bunch of reasons. On the same token, because stress is required for adaptation, you don't want to leave at the gym and feel like, I don't really do much. Like, there has to be there. So if you think about soreness on a scale of 1 to 10, you probably want to spend most of your time in like the 3.
You mean post-exercise?
Yeah.
In between workouts?
Totally.
And I know we'll talk about recovery extensively later, but if one body part or set of body parts is sore, is that an indication that one should stay out of training?
Halfway
I would
there.
imagine the answer is no,
Right.
in most cases. And secondarily to that, if a particular muscle is sore, does that mean that muscle is not ready to be trained again?
Yeah, the answer to both those is the same, which is no, right? You can certainly train a sore muscle. You need to, I guess, have a little bit of feel on that, right? So if you're sore of like, okay, like, and you're moving around a little bit and you're like, man, this is a little bit sore, you can train. If you're like, I can't sit on the couch without crying because my glutes are so sore, like we probably don't need to train again, right?
Does whimpering count as crying?
Yeah. In that particular case, I'd say you've actually gone to the place of detriment because now you're going to have to skip a training session. And now you're behind. So your actual total volume
10
across the month
seconds.
is actually going to be lower because you went way too hard in those workouts, had to take too many days off in between. You're going to see that you're going to cover less distance over the course of a month or 6 months
Well
or
done.
even a year. So you want to walk a pretty fine line. And for most people, I would say hedge a little bit on the side of